Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're just going to give everyone a minute or two to come through from the waiting room, and then we'll get started. I would encourage folks, you can keep your video on if you want, but we will be recording the session, so feel free to turn off your video if you're not comfortable with that. Hi, everybody. We're just giving everyone a minute or two to come in from the waiting room, and we'll get started. And I think we've just got one or two more folks coming in. Okay, I think that's good. I think we've got everyone in now from the waiting room, so we'll get started. And so thank you all for joining us today. We're here to offer an information session on the upcoming Slate Development Program. And I'm Janine Steele. I'm the project manager for the Domestic Motion Picture Fund. My pronouns are she and her. And I just wanted to take a moment just to acknowledge that we're just so excited to be offering this program. It's this type of financing is something that was actually spearheaded in BC almost 15 years ago. And so it's really a different kind of financing than the project by project financing that we see. So an opportunity to offer that again to our mid-level and experienced companies is something we're really looking forward to. So just first off, I just, as always, want to acknowledge that I'm grateful to be joining you from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples. That includes the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. Just a few housekeeping notes. We are recording this session for informational purposes. So this session can be available to those who weren't able to attend. So keep in mind, if you've had your camera on, you're welcome to turn that off and keep yourself on mute. Or if you don't want to have your full name display, you may want to change that in your Zoom settings. Also, live transcription has been turned on. So you can turn that on for yourself to view through your Zoom functions, and let us know in the chat if you're not seeing that. Just a note that our presentation will be broken up into sections, and so we'll be pausing at the end of each section to allow for questions around that area. So as we're talking, if something comes up for you that you'd like answered, feel free to type that into the chat window, and then we'll be scanning that and respond at the end of each section. The goal of today's session is really to talk about overall eligibility, and it's somewhat general in that sense. So in the interest of time, if you have a question that's very specific to your experience, to your company, to what you're looking to do, to your situation, we ask that you email us directly and we can have a one-on-one conversation after this session. And just a reminder that Creative BC is committed to safe and respectful work environments, so harassment of any kind will not be tolerated. So just a quick overview for those of you who may not be familiar with Creative BC, we just want to remind you that we're an independent society that's supported by the province of BC, and our aims are to sustain and grow BC's creative industries. So that includes motion picture, film and television, but also interactive and digital media, music and sound recording, and magazine and publishing. And we have a wide range of programs beyond funding and services that are offered to you to help expand these creative economies. And just quickly, I know things have changed over here quite a bit over the last year. So just to give you a sense of your funding team for programs, this is all the programs for the creative industries outside of music. But here's your team that's here to support you, and don't hesitate at any time to reach out to any of us. We're happy to talk about Slate as well as any other programs and services that we offer that might be able to help you out. So a quick overview of what we're going to be going over today. We'll talk quickly about the program as a whole. We'll get into eligibility in the application process, and then we'll talk about the evaluation process, how we make our decisions, and then a little bit, should you be successful, what happens after that? What does commitment and contracting look like? And we also wanted to take this opportunity just to provide a little bit of context. The Slate Development Program is part of the larger Domestic Motion Picture Fund, which was a $2 million commitment from the government back in 2020, which aimed to really kickstart independent production in the province. And so the role of the DMPF was the result of sort of an extensive industry consultation process that included group meetings and written questionnaires, sort of each step of the way, beginning with just generally about the direction of where the Domestic Motion Picture Fund could go, what are big picture needs and gaps. And then again, as we designed each program in the offering, we would meet individually and as groups and through questionnaires to really get a feedback on, is this the type of programming that might work? So Slate is just one of several development programs that we've released. That included targeted development support for equity and emerging filmmakers through the Equity and Emerging Development Program. And the bulk of the funding is actually coming through our production program, which will have another intake this spring. So I encourage you, if you've got a project that you're hoping to move into production this year, to keep an eye out for that in the coming weeks. So on to the Slate Development Program. So what is that? The Slate program is designed to support company growth of mid-level and experienced BC-based production companies who have a significant track record of owned and controlled independent production in the province. Recipients will be able to apply for an envelope of money to support the development of a slate of 2 or more projects, as well as support some select capacity building activities. And we'll get into more detail about what that means as we go through. So in terms of some highlights of what is included, we are looking at, you can request up to $45,000 for an envelope of money to support the development of a slate. As we say, minimum of 2 projects must be included. What can be included in that slate for funding? It can include scripted series for broadcast or VOD streaming, as well as scripted feature films. The overall budget we have available to commit is $260,000. So we anticipate that you'll be able to have up to 6 recipients through this program. The deadline to apply is coming up on January 25th. And as with most of our programs, you have until just before midnight to get those applications in. In terms of eligibility, who can apply? This was open to companies that are incorporated in British Columbia or Canada and have its head office in BC. And the primary owner and the majority common voting shareholders must be BC residents and Canadian citizens or permanent residents. How we define Canadian BC residency is a Canadian citizen or permanent resident who has resided in BC for at least 200 of the 365 years, days prior to the application, and you have filed income tax returns in BC in the previous year. You must also be in good standing with the Great of BC, which just means you haven't been placed in default due to previous contracting issues from any Creative BC programs. Generally speaking, you are in good standing. You would likely know if you were not, but if you're not sure, you're always welcome to call one of us and we can confirm for you. And additionally, in terms of who can apply, this is looking, as we said, towards mid-level and experienced companies. So you do need to have a track record. And we're defining that for this program, that in the past 5 years, you have to demonstrate one of 2 things. Either that you have had a minimum BC owned and controlled production spend of $1 million, or that you've produced and completed at least 2 BC owned and controlled film or television projects in the previous 5 years. So it isn't either or, it's not both. Either of those can help meet that minimum eligibility. Oops. In terms of project eligibility, what kind of projects we can have. So, oh, sorry, I'll go back actually. I missed one point I wanted to make. When it comes to the applicant eligibility, in terms of triggering that minimum threshold, any longer form production type, and that can include documentary or factual content, can be used to calculate those minimum thresholds. When it comes to spending, however, only certain types are available for spending. Part of the aims of the project is to support the development of high quality, commercially viable scripted series. This is, again, something that came out of our consultation processes. We recognize that's a really underfunded area within the province, and it's been historically really difficult to get scripted series off the ground here. So we want to put some energy there. So at least one of the projects earmarked for spending must be a scripted series intended for broadcast or streaming. The other project can include a scripted feature films. In addition, at least 100% of the project must be owned and controlled or optioned by the company applying, or intended to be optioned by the applicant. So you can indicate projects you want to pursue and use this funding to secure that option. There are exceptions for co-productions. Those are eligible within that program. Those are for either international treaty or interprovincial co-productions, and those follow our general guidelines as we've had with other programs. For interprovincial co-pros, that means at least 50% of the copyright must be owned by the BC co-producer. And in the case of an international treaty co-production, that generally means it's in line with the treaty that's governing that co-production agreement, which is usually at minimum 20%. Other note, you don't need to have any other third-party financing or market trigger at the time of application. In terms of projects that are not eligible for spending, again, this is for spending. You can these can generally be used to demonstrate the minimum thresholds, but for spending, if you're selected, we will not be supporting the development of unscripted or documentary projects, including reality, factual, or lifestyle, web series. Any projects that are currently supported through other Creative BC funding programs that have an active development contract currently going, as well as any excluded productions that fall into the film and television tax credit regulations. So this is, part of this unscripted programming. I'll just make a quick note about that. This is because we do have other programs at Creative BC that are currently available to support that development, and recognizing that we only have a very small amount of money here, we want to focus that on the scripted content. But if you do have documentary projects on your slate, of course, we encourage you to look at our other programs, notably, the Project Development Fund, which is always available, as well as the ongoing partnership we have with Rogers, which did just close around yesterday, but has been renewed for another year. So we'll continue to see further rounds of that program come out in the upcoming year, and encourage you to look out for that. In terms of eligible costs for the projects that the money would be spent on, these are sort of our, again, standard development costs that can include rights or option fees, any costs, any phase of writing the scripts, conducting research or interviews, putting together a demo or animatics, polish and packaging fees, as well as legal services, and can include producer fees and overhead. Just a quick note about what capacity building is. So we've talked about, what can the eligible projects and that project spending look like. Thanks to a partnership with the CMPA, BC Producers Branch, we're really pleased to offer a value-added component to the Slate program. So a portion of the budgeted $45,000 must be dedicated to new company-wide expenses that help the growth of the company. So that's between $5,000 and $10,000 of the budget must be dedicated to this. These need to be tied to an identified area of company growth that you'll tell us about, must cover a must be outside project-specific activities, and must be payable to external parties such as vendors or suppliers or new company hires. So it's not meant to cover existing sort of corporate work, but rather how can we help your company, your corporate, vision and business grow. In terms of eligible costs under that capacity building component, that can include things like hiring a lawyer, a business affairs or accounting services, engaging with a mentor, whether that's as a producer mentor, a coach, or an advisor of some sort, again, focused around your company goals, hiring executive support, so a development producer or marketing in-house or human resources, or perhaps hiring someone more junior that you choose to mentor as the senior leader in the company. As well, we can focus on company-wide training or workshops. And we'll talk in more detail with the selected recipients about what this is. So this is really just a list to get you started, get the ideas flowing. So we'll stop there. When it comes to eligibility, are there any questions for us? And Robin's going to have a quick boo through the chat. So if anything's come up, don't hesitate to write that in. Robin, do we have anything in there?
Yeah, we've got one about regarding applicant eligibility, that the applicant must demonstrate in the past 5 years. What is the exact cutoff date for the past 5 years? Is it January 25th, 2017?
Excellent question. So we are trying to be flexible with this. We're looking in general in the 5 years. So I would say the calendar years or the taxation years. So roughly from 2017 till now would be the period that we're looking in. We're not going to be asking for financial statements and going, right down to the letter of a date. It's more to demonstrate that there's a trajectory for your company, that it's been growing over the past 5 years, has that minimum spend, and then where is your company going from here?
And following that, Janine, is that release date?
I think that we do ask for the release date in the documents, or the produce date. So I think, again, this is really about how how you run your business, how you look at that. But in general, what's the year that the project was produced and where the majority of that spending occurred? That's what I would look at, as opposed to the release date.
Does TELUS Optic TV qualify as a VOD system?
TELUS Optic, yes, that would cover under streamers. Sort of, we're obviously, interested in those who are working with some of the bigger streamers, around North America, but also folks like CBC Gem and TELUS and others that are finding that audience online.
If projects that have previously received Creative BC development funding, would they still be eligible if the intended development activities are for a new phase?
If it's a new phase, yes, we could consider that. And, we'll get into this a bit later, but you don't need to identify those projects immediately to us, and we can talk about that before we contract. But as long as it's a new phase of work with new costs, that should be fine.
Does a series or feature based on existing IP, for example, a book, have to be written by a Canadian author?
No, it wouldn't have to. I think, as with all of our programs, any opportunity for our creative industries to intersect is really a bonus for us. So, ideally, we'd love to see Canadian authors being developed and optioned, but it's not a requirement of the program.
What counts as completed 2 BC-controlled film or TV projects?
I'm guessing in terms of production types, we're talking about longer form content. So series and feature length is ideally what we're looking at. And that can be whether that's scripted or documentary, reality, or factual. As I say, in terms of meeting the minimum threshold, we want to hear from companies that have been working across different production types and then are focusing on some developing new scripted content. Anything else for us, Robin?
Yes. So just following that question, actually, in terms of what counts as a BC-controlled film or TV production, does it have to be? Does co-producing that production count? Does PS count? Yeah.
I would say that. So co-production, certainly where the BC producer owns a certain percentage. And again, I think, our general philosophy rule of thumb there is that the BC producer is the majority producer. So at least 51% is being controlled by the BC producer for interprovincial co-production. For international co-productions, we'd look at the treaty that oversaw that. So again, could be a minimum of 20, but will vary depending on who you've co-produced with. When it comes to production services, we are for the eligibility, we are looking for owned and controlled production. That being said, should you be able to meet that, when it comes to the evaluation criteria and looking at the track record of the individuals involved in that company, any credits and experience you have, regardless of whether it's owned and controlled production, will have an impact. But we are looking for the eligibility needs to be some owned and controlled production.
We are a BC producer working as co-producers with another BC producer who owns the rights. Does that count?
I think we'd have to look. We might ask for the co-production agreement in that scenario, and see what that looks like. Generally, if there's 2 BC companies involved in a project, we consider that 100% BC owned and controlled for both parties. But I think it does depend. If you don't own any of the copyright and you're just working with them, that's something different than if it's 2 BC companies that are sharing the copyright. So we'd probably have to meet and talk about your particular situation.
I own a production company that does TV advertising and documentary work. Does advertising production work qualify as previous experience?
I think maybe it would be great if you gave me a call after this. I would say that I'm not quite sure what we mean by advertising in this context. If it's commercials, I think that would, again, talk to the track record, but not necessarily meet the aims of this program, which is about supporting companies that have been working in longer form content. But maybe I'm not understanding what you mean by advertising. So happy to chat about that one-on-one.
Another question, Janine, would a completed short doc that aired on TV and did a festival run, does that qualify?
Generally speaking, as I say, we're really looking for folks that have been working in longer form content. So I would say that if that's your only credit, shorts aren't really going to meet that minimum eligibility. That being said, if you have that along with other work and you have, maybe it's a newer company with individuals that as shareholders that individually, have a more extensive track record, we can certainly discuss it, or you can choose to put an application in. We will be doing an eligibility review and make a determination then. But we can talk about that in a bit more detail. Like I said, really, this is about folks that have been working in longer form content in general, but we do want to try and be flexible because this is a new program and we want to get a sense of the companies that are working in the industry.
Another question, can multiple production companies apply together to satisfy that threshold?
This is a company-focused program, so it's less about the development of the projects in the slate and more about supporting company growth. So what I would say is that you're applying as a company. It's not really something you can kind of make a conglomerate application for, because we're looking at what is your company, what's the track record of your company and the individuals involved in it, and what is the trajectory of that company? How is it going to contribute to the rise of owned and controlled production in the province? So if it's a new company with, as I say, maybe it's a new company with individual shareholders that bring that track record, that's one thing. But two companies coming together that are making a joint application, it's not really the purpose of this program.
You mentioned that documentary series on television meet eligibility, but are you mainly looking at companies that have already produced scripted TV series at least once?
It's a good question. It's not a requirement. We recognize, as we say, it's been difficult to get scripted series off the ground here. So there's not a ton of companies that are operating that have a long track record. And so we want to encourage folks to move into that production type. That being said, within the evaluation criteria, there will be some priority given to companies that do have previous experience in scripted series, but it's not a sole determinant.
In terms of threshold, are works in post-production considered? Also, is there a list of qualifying festivals?
In terms of post-production, we really say completed. So this really needs to be completed and delivered as opposed to in various stages of post. That's really what we're looking for. Ideally, it's been aired, but it could be something that's been delivered to your broadcaster or is going out in film festivals upcoming. That's an option, but really it shouldn't be in post-production. In terms of film festivals, we don't have a set list. I think, we really are looking at the top tier sort of performing festivals, both nationally and internationally. So that, and we really want to see a breadth of that. So as opposed to a project that maybe has attended one or two film festivals, if it's something that's really been running that sort of premier festival circuit and has some of the bigger names like Toronto, Vancouver, Whistler locally, Doxa, Hot Docs, and then, moving internationally, things like Cannes and Sundance and Tribeca and all of those across Europe, then that's going to have a bit more weight than something that's only been to a few festivals or they're not quite name recognized festivals. That's sort of, it's not a cut and dry thing. It's sort of a gut feeling on that.
Janine, if two production companies are working on a single project together and both applying individually, can they both include the project as part of their slate?
I'll get to that in the next section when we talk about the application process. You're not required to identify the projects that you're going to spend your money on at the time of application. We're looking for an overview of your slate. So I'll get into a bit more detail on that. So in theory, yes, if two companies are working together, they can put in separate applications. We would then look, when it comes to contracting, what the project, if you both were successful, what projects you're spending money on. Anything specific along eligibility? Just give it one more minute to see if anything else comes up. There was, just to reiterate, because I think some people maybe joined a little bit later, the aims of this particular program are focused towards mid-level and experienced production companies that have some track record in the province. And so really it is about focusing on the company growth of those types of companies and how they're going to, their growth moving forward. If you did come in late, we will be providing a full recording of the session, so you can always go back and get that information.
I think that's it for this section, Janine. Yeah.
Okay, great. We'll move on to our next section then. So the application process, what does that look like? So in terms of sort of the success to this pathway to success, we encourage you as always to read our full guidelines. We will have an FAQ posted after these sessions are completed. There's evaluation criteria that you can review in detail. We've included an application checklist. And then of course, there's the online submission form, and you can review the full online form before you hit submit so that you know what you need to gather. So we encourage you to review all of that and then gather the materials that you need. Then you can go online and start entering all of that. The other thing that we wanted to point out, there's going to be a new key personnel, a new self-identification form for your key personnel. And in this instance, that means the shareholders and directors of your company. So I'll talk about that in a moment. But that's going to be something that's sent directly to them. You're not to collect that information for them. And then lastly, you can submit all of that online. So in terms of the required materials, as I say, there's the online application form, and that includes you providing contact email to us for the key personnel, so the shareholders and directors of your company. So this is something new that we're offering at Creative BC. Really, this is an opportunity for self-identification to truly be that the individuals are providing that information confidentially. So once your application is submitted, those folks that you've entered as your shareholders and directors will receive an email from us to complete the self-identification form through our online system. Submission of the self-ID forms is mandatory for the process, but you don't have to, as with any of our self-identification forms, you do not have to, you can choose not to respond to all the questions, but the form itself needs to be submitted. So we do ask you that once you've submitted your form that you give a heads up to your shareholders and directors so that they know that that email is coming through. It could be caught in their spam filter since it's coming from our online system. So that's the online form. We'll also ask you for an overview of previously completed works. That's to help demonstrate at least meeting the minimum threshold or in general showing the history of your company. We'll also ask for an overview of your entire development slate, and I'll get into a bit more detail of that. And then a high level budget. And really this is very high level at this point. At the minimum, all we're asking for you is to outline what you intend to spend on project development versus the capacity building activities. You don't need to get into detailed information about how you're going to spend that money on projects right now, but you can provide that if you wish, if you've already done that work, but it's not required at the application stage. In addition to that, we'll ask for a development business plan, which would be 4 pages, around about there. And that's really about telling that narrative of your company and where you're going. And then a short sort of 1-page overview of your thinking around the capacity building activities. And again, I'll get into a bit more detail about each of these items. So templates are available on our website for a number of these things, including filmography of your shareholders and directors. If you don't already have that in a template, you don't have to use ours, but you can certainly submit anything you've got it in already, or you can use our filmography template. We've got a template for the previously completed works that we ask you to use, and an overview of your development slate that we ask you to use. As well, you'll be asked to fill out an incumbency certificate, which is common to most of our programs. So in terms of some of those required materials, what does that look like? So the previously completed works, this is, as I say, for you to show us that you're meeting that minimum threshold and just a sense of what those projects are. So we'll ask for things like, as I say, the name of the project, the year it was produced, what was the total budget, what production type was that, what genre, and then some information about, who distributed it, who was the broadcasters, did it receive any awards, what festivals did it attend? So it's really just about giving that snapshot so that we can see the history of your company. And we ask you to do that for at least the last 5 years to demonstrate that minimum threshold. But you can go further if your company has been around longer to really show that growth of your life cycle. In terms of the development slate, as I said, at the time of the application, you don't need to identify the exact projects you're going to spend the slate funding on. And this is because, and so instead what we're asking is for an overview of the overall development slate of your company. And this is partly because, this program is focused more on company support and less on the creative of the projects that are on that slate. And so we want to give you the opportunity. We're selecting you as a company we feel, has that potential, is able to make those critical decisions, gives you the flexibility to make those decisions for yourself. So you can move quickly should you be selected. It also means you don't have to determine the funding you're going to spend and then wait 4 months before you can spend it. You can just get your application in, and then should you be selected, we can talk about how you're going to spend that money. Gives you the opportunity to move quickly, as I say, if there's an option that comes up that you want to pursue. So in terms of the development slate, similar questions as we had on the overview of the previous works. We just want, really a snapshot of what your projects are, including things like if you already have writers or directors attached, who are they? Have you optioned it yet, or is it still something you wish to option? Where do you intend to distribute it? How? These sorts of questions. So you can also choose to include on this 1 to 2 projects that maybe you haven't yet optioned, but you think you wish to pursue them with this funds. Because again, this gives us a sense of the type of work that you want to do. Who are you working with? What type of projects are you developing as a company? So that really helps us to understand what growth, what is your trajectory? And just the more information you can provide here really proves useful to us to help us understand the aims and goals of your company. Now, we recognize that this is very sensitive information. So we do take that quite seriously, and I'll talk in a bit more detail. We will keep this very close to our chest and make sure that there's, anyone who's reading this is signed by non-disclosures, is not in conflict with any of that information. So it's up to you really how much information you want to share with us here. But as I say, this is going to help us understand the type of work your company wishes to do. So the more information you can share here, the better. In terms of the business plan, this is really the primary evaluation tool that we'll use in the evaluation of these programs. So this is meant to sort of show this narrative, right? We're talking about a program focused on corporate growth. So through the development of your work. So sell your company to us. Why you? Why now? Where have you come from and where are you going? What makes your company stand out, both in where you've been and where you want to go? And how will you shape the future of the province, the production of the province? So be strategic in this. This is, as I say, going to be our primary tool. We ask you to touch on marketing and distribution strategies and talent development within your slate. You don't have to get entirely specific on every project in your slate, because obviously that would be a lot more information. But again, getting a sense and understanding who you've been working with, who you have contacts with, or where you're going, who are you going to be working with, will be helpful to us in the sense. So we can see that you understand the lay of the land, where the direction the industry is going, all of those things. So be concise and use all of that pages as much as you can. Just a quick note about the capacity activities plan. As I say, this can be very high level. It's really just to give us a sense of what you're thinking. We ask you to identify a current gap at the company and then provide a short description of the activity that you want to undertake. We will meet with all recipients one-on-one along with the CMPA to finalize this plan after decisions have been made. So this doesn't have to be set in stone or super concrete. It's again, just to give us an understanding, help us see that you understand how to identify areas for growth and how you want to address them. So it's super high level at this point. In terms of optional materials that you'll be able to include in your application, you'll be able to share previous work or a demo reel or teasers. You can upload letters of support. So that's either, current or former partners that you've worked with that, can speak highly to you, individuals in your community or around you that can really talk about, but why they enjoy working with you, why they feel you're really suited for this program. So let someone speak for you. It also helps the advisory panel, get a better sense of you and the community that's behind you. You'll also have an opportunity to link to a company's project page if that's something you've got on your website. Again, just helps provide that context to the overview of your slate that you've already provided to us. So we'll pause there around the application process. Are there any questions about applying or questions we missed about eligibility?
Just give it a second, Janine.
Of course, thank you.
There is one question more about eligibility that we missed earlier. But do we recognize French projects as well, but French projects that are made in BC?
Absolutely, 100%. We would love to see, more coming from companies that are working in languages other than English. And so, yeah, I would welcome that.
For recently completed production lists, should we include scripted and factual?
Yes, I would encourage. Yes, that's meant to demonstrate that what your company is coming from. So that should be all production types, regardless of what we're going to be funding. And even in the development slate, we would encourage you to list more than just scripted series. It's meant to give a snapshot of what you're working on. What's the volume of work that you're developing at any given time? What types of work you're working on? Again, you don't need to identify the projects you're going to spend the money on. So as long as there's one or two scripted works on there, that's totally fine.
Can we also include podcasts, scripted and unscripted, in the completed production list and development slate?
That's an interesting question. I would say yes, include it. It's interesting information to know if you're coming from a background of podcasting. I'm not sure that podcasting would meet our minimum eligibility. Like ultimately, if it's all you have on your slate, that's another question. But it's interesting to know that that's an area that you're working in.
When you say a 1 million spend, can you specify the company's role in the spend?
You would need to be, 100% owner-controlled or a majority partner if it's a co-production, an interprovincial co-production. We just asked for the overall production budget in our template. So that's what we'll be looking at, but we will want you to be the majority owner. Or in the case of if it's a treaty co-production, then as long as it's in line with your treaty co-production agreement.
Does an animated scripted feature series qualify for the slate?
Yes, 100%. Sorry, I didn't specify about genres, but all genres under the scripted sort of scripted realm would be, including drama, comedy, animated, sci-fi, thriller, supernatural, children's programming, youth programming. We welcome all of that. As I say, we're going to be looking, this is really about identifying companies that we want to support. And so we trust you to make those creative decisions about the projects best for you to pursue in the scripted realm. So we're not going to be very prescriptive about the types of projects you're supporting.
A lot of these questions come from the problem that companies in BC that actually need these funds have a weird mix of PS where they don't own the rights and micro productions that have unusual distribution and lengths. How flexible are these requirements?
What I would say is that, if you think, we did discuss these requirements, through our consultation process, and we talked about, were these prohibitive in terms of minimum eligibility? And for the most part, the feedback that we got was that no, it's not a lot of money. We can only support 6 applicants. So we do still suspect it will be highly oversubscribed. So it really comes down to that. But we also recognize we don't know all the companies that are working, and we want to know how you're working and what you're working. So if you feel that your company meets the aims and objectives of the program and that you meet that minimum criteria in some form, then by all means, feel free to submit it. We will still do an eligibility review, which I'll talk about shortly. So there, we'll have a chance to look at all of the program projects together, or program applications together. But it is about identifying mid-level and experienced companies and supporting their growth. We do have a lot of other programs that don't have these types of requirements, that are for those that are still trying to get their first or second projects off the ground. So this is a very targeted program in that sense, and we don't have a lot of applications to give out. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Minimum eligibility is just that, it's a threshold, but the evaluation criteria, which we'll talk about next, will really determine where that funding is going to go. Any other questions for us, Robin?
I think that's it for this section, Janine.
Okay, great. And there's opportunity for questions at the end too, if anything comes up. Thank you. So in terms of what the evaluation process looks like. So the steps to evaluation, we will do and confirm that all applications are complete. Incomplete applications cannot be accepted. We will give you an opportunity to submit anything that was missed. But it'll be a short sort of window, like 5 days. We'll contact you and you'll have a short amount of time to get that in. We'll also conduct an eligibility review, as I said. You know, this is a new program. We do want to be a bit flexible, but we've sort of identified these minimum thresholds in consultation. So we'll review all the applications and determine those who are eligible to continue to the competitive review. If you're determined to be ineligible, we will let you know before it goes to a competitive evaluation. Then we'll do a competitive review and we'll communicate those decisions. So we're really looking at our turnaround time we're looking at as a minimum of 10 weeks from the deadline, not just from your application, because we won't start reviewing applications till they're all in, since it is competitive. So about 10 weeks from the deadline date before we'll be able to communicate decisions. And so that's really going to be around in sort of mid-April. So in terms of the decision-making process, some of our priorities here, as I say, our eligibility guidelines are really about minimum thresholds, so they don't guarantee support. So the evaluation criteria will then become critical. Focus is on company experience and growth potential, and less on creative. So as I say, if there are companies that greatly exceed that minimum threshold, they will likely perform better in our evaluation criteria. And as I said earlier, priority will also be given to companies who have produced scripted series or have a significant roster of series on their slate, because that's the area of underserved that we've sort of identified with this program. We will also include some weighted criteria, which I will, I think my next slide is about the criteria, so we'll go right there. So as this program is focused on company growth, our evaluation will take into account sort of two key areas: the applicant and the key creative team. And again, in this instance, that's really the shareholders and directors. So looking at their track record and experience as well, both as a company and then as individuals. As well, we have some weighted criteria so that there are additional points if the company is under-controlled by any of our equity or sovereignty-seeking groups. And that, in this instance, does include women and non-binary individuals, but also includes Indigenous, Black, people of color, people with disabilities, and members of the LGBTQ2S+ community. And then on the second half, we also will look, and really this is the crux of the evaluation, as I said, the business plan and your slate. So that will include your articulation of your corporate aims, as I say, that narrative, your storytellers, so tell us your story, and the potential of the projects on your overall slate to really contribute to the rise of VC-owned and controlled IP and the support of talent that's demonstrated across your slate. So again, some information on who those teams are is helpful for us in this evaluation. And next, we'll just talk a quick note about advisory panels. So as you know, a lot of our programs recently have been employing the use of advisory panels, which is something that's come out of feedback, again, quite a bit. We want to make sure that there's industry representation in our decision process, that it's really the people that understand about the industry and the trials and tribulations that you go through as an independent producer. So we may utilize an advisory panel for this to help inform our decisions. And when we use them, they're always industry professionals that represent a cross-section of our industry and the demographics of the province. Again, I'll just reiterate that due to the sensitive nature of the content in this application, especially when you're giving us information about the projects in your development slate, we will take special care in determining who should be on the advisory panel to ensure that there's no conflict of interest. So what that might look like here is, as opposed to with other programs where we look to filmmakers, directors, and producers, writers, to help form our advisory panels, we may look more at folks that are working around the industry. So that might be former broadcast executives or current broadcast executives, or folks that used to work or have worked in funding agencies like ourselves or support agencies. So people, again, that understand the industry but are not directly involved in developing and producing content. At the same time, they are all required to sign conflict of interest statements before they can receive any information for review, and make sure that they're not going to use that information other than in the purpose of reviewing these. So we will treat that very carefully. The majority of the review will be done by Creative BC staff, but we want to make sure we get that strong overview from the industry perspective. And then in terms of what happens should you be successful, as I said, up to 6 recipients should be able to be selected. We will confirm all those decisions via email. And then if you're not successful, you are welcome to request some written feedback about the process. And then for those that are successful, as I say, you haven't had to determine what projects you're going to be supporting. So before we contract or any spending occurs, you'll need to submit to us the projects on your slate that you want to spend the money on and the proposed budgets for each of those. We'll need to approve that before any spending occurs or before we contract. As well, as I say, we'll need to approve the capacity building activities portion of your budget, and that will be done in conjunction with the CMPA. So again, just to reiterate, in terms of that, the projects on your slate, at least one project determined for spending must be a scripted series. But we do again give you flexibility. Even after we've approved that, projects can be swapped out as long as you come back to us before the spending occurs. Again, this gives you the opportunity, the flexibility. If something comes up and you're like, I need to get that option right now, that's what I want to spend my money on, you just call us and we'll make that happen, as long as it's still an eligible project and eligible costs. Short and sweet, that section. We'll pause there again for any questions around commitments or the evaluation process.
Can new BC companies apply that have been formed with directors with spend or copyright in BC projects?
I would say that that's something that we'd be interested in seeing. It's not completely clear in our guidelines, but if you are a new BC company that's formed with quite experienced shareholders and directors, then by all means, submit that application and we'd like to have a look at that. I think we had originally saw this as companies that had been operating for a certain number of years, but I think also recognizing that new partnerships form in many different ways as we try to make things happen in the province. So we want to see that and give that an opportunity to perform.
Just give it a few seconds for your questions to come in.
Of course. Now, if there's, I think I saw a note from Elizabeth, there's a question about distribution. This is pretty much the end of our presentation. So Elizabeth, if you want to, if it's a general question, feel free to type it into the chat, or feel free to reach out to me after the session and we can talk about it one-on-one. Any other questions that maybe we missed? I think that might be it. I will just say, I think that's maybe it then. So I just want to say thank you. If anything comes up, as I say, after you leave the session, if you have specific questions about your situation, please reach out to me. My email address is on the screen. You can always reach us through the website. We're happy to help as you work on your applications and as we try to roll out this new program. What we learn from this as well will hopefully influence should the Domestic Ocean Picture Fund be renewed, which we certainly hope it will be, and that we'll be able to offer this type of programming again in the future. We'll be looking as ever to make adjustments for what the best needs of the industry are. So thank you for taking the time today. Thank you for your energy. And I think we'll close it there. Have a great afternoon.